Las Vegas, 1973. Elvis Presley, in the midst of a record-breaking series of shows at the International Hotel. On stage, in his white embroidered jumpsuit, he mesmerizes thousands with that legendary voice. But just 20 minutes before the show, in his backstage room, he was telling his personal assistant, "I want to die tonight. I can't take being Elvis Presley for one more day." And after the show, a completely different man, in tears, whispered, "I don't understand why they love me so much." These backstage audio recordings, kept secret for 40 years, reveal the dark truth of Elvis's Las Vegas years that we never knew. The spotlight blazes, casting a golden glow across the International Hotel's showroom. A 20-piece orchestra strikes up the dramatic opening notes of Also Sprach Zarathustra, the theme from 2001, A Space Odyssey, that has become Elvis Presley's signature entrance music. The crowd of 2,000 fans rises to their feet in anticipation, their faces upturned, eyes fixed on the still empty stage. And then he appears. Elvis Presley, 38 years old, clad in a white jumpsuit with elaborate gold and blue embroidery, his black hair styled in that famous pompadour, stands center stage as the music reaches its crescendo. The audience erupts, screams, applause, flashbulbs popping like stars in the Las Vegas night. "Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen," Elvis says in that unmistakable Mississippi drawl. "It's a pleasure to be back at the International Hotel." His voice is strong, confident, commanding, the voice of a man who has sold hundreds of millions of records, starred in 31 movies, and changed the very fabric of American culture. This is Elvis the entertainer. Elvis the legend. Elvis the king. But 20 minutes earlier, a very different Elvis Presley sat in his dressing room on the 30th floor of the same hotel, his hands trembling so badly he could barely hold his cup of water. "I can't do it, Charlie," he had said to Charlie Hodge, his friend and stage assistant. "I can't go out there tonight. I just can't be him again." "Be who, Charlie had asked, though he already knew the answer. "Elvis Presley," Elvis had replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want to die tonight. I can't take being Elvis Presley for one more day." This stark contrast between the electrifying performer who commanded the Las Vegas stage and the deeply troubled man behind the scenes is at the heart of a remarkable collection of audio recordings that have remained hidden for nearly half a century. Recorded secretly by Elvis's personal assistant, Richard Gordon, between 1969 and 1976, these Las Vegas diaries provide an unprecedented glimpse into the private world of the king of rock and roll during what would be the final act of his legendary career. Richard Gordon was hired as part of Elvis's entourage in late 1968, just as the singer was preparing for his famous comeback special on NBC. A former journalism student with a keen eye for detail, Gordon quickly became one of Elvis's most trusted confidants, the person who brought Elvis his meals, managed his medications, and often stayed with him during the small hours when the star's insomnia kept him awake and vulnerable. "Elvis hired me because I wasn't a yes man," Gordon, now 78, explained in a recent interview. "Everyone else around him just told him what he wanted to hear. From day one I was straight with him. I think he respected that." What Elvis didn't know was that Gordon, harboring ambitions of someday writing the definitive biography of the king, had taken to recording their conversations using a small tape recorder, hidden in his jacket pocket, or placed inconspicuously in Elvis's suite. "I know it was a breach of trust," Gordon admits now, his voice heavy with the weight of his confession. "But I also knew I was witnessing history, seeing a side of Elvis that the world never got to see. I felt a responsibility to preserve it." The recordings, which Gordon kept locked in a safety deposit box for decades after Elvis's death in 1977, total more than 300 hours of conversations, spanning Elvis's entire Vegas period, from his triumphant return to live performing in 1969 to his final often troubling shows in 1976, just months before his death. For years Gordon wrestled with what to do with the recordings. Fear of legal repercussions from Elvis's estate kept him silent. But as he entered his later years, a cancer diagnosis forced him to consider his legacy and what would happen to this remarkable archive. I realize these recordings tell an important story, he says. They show the human being behind the legend, a man struggling with fame, addiction, and his place in the world. It's not always pretty, but it's real. After lengthy negotiations with the Presley estate and Elvis's daughter Lisa Marie, before her passing in 2023, an agreement was reached. Portions of the recordings could be made public, with proceeds benefiting addiction treatment programs, a cause that resonated given Elvis's well-documented struggles with prescription medication. The recordings begin in July 1969, as Elvis prepared for his return to live performing after years of making movies. His nervousness is palpable as he paces his suite at the newly opened International Hotel. "What if they don't want me anymore, Richard?" Elvis asks on one recording. "What if they've moved on? The Beatles, the Rolling Stones, that's what kids listen to now. Maybe Elvis Presley is just a relic." Gordon's voice can be heard reassuring him. "They're selling out every show before a single ticket goes on sale to the general public. Trust me, they still want you." Elvis's doubt seems almost inconceivable now, given the overwhelming success of his Vegas shows. His 1969 residency broke all attendance records for the city, and his performances were hailed by critics as a triumphant return to form after years of mediocre movies had damaged his credibility as a serious artist. But the recordings reveal that even at this career high point, Elvis harbored deep insecurities about his relevance and his abilities. "I had this dream last night," he confides to Gordon after one particularly successful show. "I was on stage, singing, and suddenly realized I was completely naked. But nobody in the audience seemed to notice or care. They were all just smiling and applauding like nothing was wrong." What do you think that means? Gordon doesn't offer an interpretation on the tape, but the dream's symbolism seems clear in retrospect. Elvis felt exposed, vulnerable, yet compelled to maintain the facade of the entertainer regardless of his inner state. As the residencies continued year after year, Elvis typically performed 2 shows a night, 7 days a week, for a month at a time. The toll on his physical and mental health becomes increasingly evident in the recordings. A particularly revealing conversation takes place in February 1971, as Elvis sits in his suite after a midnight show. "Did you see that guy in the front row tonight?" Elvis asks. "The one with the Elvis is King sign?" "Sure did," Gordon replies. "He was going crazy during Suspicious Minds." There's a long pause on the tape, just the sound of ice clinking in a glass. "He doesn't know me," Elvis finally says. "None of them do. They love something I created, something that isn't even real. If they knew the real me, they'd probably ask for their money back." This theme, the disconnect between Elvis's public image and his true self, recurs throughout the recordings. In one late-night session from 1972, Elvis reflects more explicitly on this divide. "There's Elvis Presley, and then there's me," he says, his speech slightly slurred, likely from medication. "Elvis Presley belongs to the world. He's what they need him to be. But me, I don't even know who I am anymore. When I'm alone, when there's no one watching, I sometimes can't remember who I'm supposed to be." By 1973, the year of our opening scene, the contrast between Elvis's public and private personas had grown even more pronounced. On stage, he remained a commanding presence, his voice still capable of spine-tingling power on ballads like American Trilogy and How Great Thou Art. But backstage, as Gordon's recordings reveal, Elvis was increasingly dependent on a cocktail of prescription medications to function. One of the most disturbing recordings comes from August 1973, captured just moments before Elvis was due on stage. "Dr. Nick just left," Elvis tells Gordon, referring to his personal physician, Dr. George Nicopolis. "Gave me something new, says it'll help with the anxiety without making me too sleepy." "You sure that's a good idea, E?" Gordon asks. "Mixing all these different pills? What choice do I have?" Elvis replies, his voice rising with unexpected anger. You think I can walk out there as just a normal man? Elvis Presley can't have anxiety. Elvis Presley can't be tired or sad or scared. Elvis Presley has to be perfect every single night. Whatever it takes to be that person for 2 hours, that's what I'll do. Minutes later, according to Gordon's notes accompanying the recording, Elvis walked on stage and delivered a flawless performance, giving no indication of the turmoil that had preceded it. Perhaps the most poignant moments in the Las Vegas Diaries come after the shows, when Elvis, running on adrenaline and often unable to sleep, would reflect on the evening's performance. They were screaming so loud during Suspicious Minds I could barely hear myself, he says on one such recording from 1974. But did you notice I forgot a whole verse of Burning Love? Not one person seemed to care. Sometimes I think I could just stand there and not sing a note, and they'd still cheer. On another occasion, after a particularly emotional show where many audience members had been in tears during his gospel numbers, Elvis seems genuinely perplexed. I don't understand why they love me so much, he says, his own voice choked with emotion. What am I giving them that means so much? It's just songs. It's just me up there trying my best. But they're crying like I've given them some kind of religious experience. Gordon can be heard offering his perspective. You give them joy, Elvis. For 2 hours they forget their problems and just feel good. That's a rare gift. Elvis falls silent for a long moment before responding. But who does that for me? The recordings don't just capture Elvis's existential musings, they also document the practical challenges of maintaining his grueling performance schedule. There are conversations with various doctors about pain management for his various physical ailments, discussions with his father Vernon about financial concerns, and sometimes tense exchanges with Colonel Tom Parker, his manager, about scheduling and commitments. One particularly revealing conversation from 1975 captures Elvis pushing back against the Colonel's insistence on maintaining the twice-yearly Vegas residencies. I need a break, Colonel, Elvis says, sounding exhausted. I'm not a machine. We could do a tour instead. Different cities, different crowds. Vegas is killing me. Vegas is a gold mine, Elvis, Parker responds, his voice firm. The hotel pays top dollar because they know you fill the showroom and the casino floor. It's good business. For who? Elvis mutters, but apparently not loud enough for Parker to hear. As the recordings move into 1976, Elvis's decline becomes increasingly apparent. His speech is often slurred, his train of thought sometimes difficult to follow. There are long silences and emotional outbursts that seem disproportionate to their triggers. In one of the final recordings, from December 1976, what would be Elvis's last Vegas engagement, Gordon captures a heartbreaking moment of self-awareness from the king. I saw some recent pictures of me in the paper, Elvis says. I barely recognized myself. What happened to me, Richard? You've been working too hard, Gordon replies. Not taking care of yourself. No, it's more than that, Elvis insists. Something's slipping away. I can feel it. When I started out, the music was all that mattered. It was inside me, bursting to get out. Now I have to search for it. And some nights I can't find it at all. He pauses, and the tape captures the sound of him lighting a cigarette. I used to think I'd die young and beautiful, like James Dean. Now I'm afraid I'll just fade away, bit by bit, until there's nothing left of the real me at all. Elvis Presley died just 8 months later, on August 16, 1977, at his Graceland mansion in Memphis. He was 42 years old. The Las Vegas Diaries present a complex portrait of a man who seemed to have everything but was in many ways imprisoned by his own success. The recordings reveal an Elvis Presley far removed from the caricature he sometimes became in popular culture, not just the hip-swiveling rebel of the 1950s, or the jumpsuited Vegas performer of the 1970s, but a deeply thoughtful, often philosophical man who grappled with the meaning of his extraordinary life. People think they know Elvis from the movies, the TV specials, the concerts, says Gordon. But those were all performances. Even interviews. Elvis was always on, always playing the role expected of him. These recordings capture him when the spotlight was off, when he could just be himself, for better or worse. The raw humanity of the recordings is what makes them so compelling. Here is one of the most famous men in the world expressing doubts, fears, and insecurities that are startlingly relatable. For all his wealth and fame, Elvis struggled with questions most of us confront. Who am I really? What is my purpose? Am I worthy of being loved? Music historians who have been granted access to the recordings suggest they add crucial context to our understanding of Elvis's Vegas period, which has often been dismissed as a sad epilogue to his earlier, more vital work. What these recordings tell us is that Elvis was far more aware of his situation than we've previously understood, explains music critic Grail Marcus, who has listened to portions of the archive. There's a narrative that Vegas Elvis was a puppet, controlled by the Colonel, drugged by his doctors, just going through the motions. But what I hear in these tapes is a man fighting to maintain his artistic integrity, fighting to connect with his audience, fighting his own demons. Yes, he often lost those battles, but there was a struggle there that deserves our respect. For Elvis fans, the Las Vegas Diaries may be difficult listening. The vulnerability and sometimes despair in Elvis's private conversations stands in stark contrast to the confident, even cocky public persona they've come to love. But this more complete picture of the king, talented yet tortured, powerful yet deeply vulnerable, might ultimately deepen their connection to him. Elvis was human, says Gordon simply. That's what these recordings show more than anything. Behind the legend, behind the jumpsuit, and the karate moves, and the thank you very much ladies and gentlemen, there was a human being dealing with extraordinary circumstances the best way he knew how. Perhaps the most profound insight from the Las Vegas Diaries comes from Elvis himself, in a moment of clarity recorded in the quiet hours after a show in 1974. Sometimes I think my whole life has been about trying to figure out who the real Elvis Presley is, he says. There's the Elvis who grew up poor in Tupelo, the Elvis who drove a truck in Memphis, the Elvis who shocked the world on Ed Sullivan, the Elvis who went to Hollywood, the Elvis who went to the army, the Elvis who came back. So many versions of me. But which one is real? After a long pause, he answers his own question. Maybe they're all real. Maybe that's what a life is. All these different people you are at different times. All somehow the same person too. But I'll tell you one thing. The Elvis that people think they know, the one in the magazines and the movies, that might be the least real Elvis of all. In the end, the Las Vegas Diaries don't diminish Elvis Presley's legacy. They humanize it. They remind us that behind every icon is a person grappling with the consequences of extraordinary fame and talent. They reveal that the same voice that could send shivers down the spines of thousands in a Las Vegas showroom could also, in private moments, express the doubts and fears that make us all human. And perhaps most importantly, they allow Elvis Presley, a man who spent his life being defined by others, to at last speak for himself, unfiltered and unedited, about the experience of being Elvis. I hope people listen to these recordings with compassion, says Gordon. Elvis gave so much of himself to his audience. He deserves to be remembered not just as an entertainer, but as a human being who carried the weight of exceptional talent and unprecedented fame. That's not an easy load for anyone to bear. In one of the most affecting recordings, made late at night after a particularly triumphant show in August 1969, Elvis seems to glimpse both his past and his future with unsettling clarity. You know, Richard, he says, his voice weary but lucid, when I was a kid in Tupelo, I used to dream about being somebody important, somebody special. I got everything I dreamed of, and then some. But nobody tells you the price. Nobody warns you that when you become something bigger than yourself, you might lose yourself completely in the process. He falls silent for a long moment before adding, I wonder if there's a way back. A way to just be Elvis Aaron Presley again. Not Elvis Presley in neon lights. The recording captures what sounds like a tired laugh. Probably not, but maybe if I keep looking, I'll find him again someday. Elvis Presley never found his way back to that simpler self. But in these remarkable recordings, we find something precious, not just insights into the private world of a public icon, but a powerful reminder that even those who seem to have everything may still struggle with the most fundamental human questions of identity, purpose, and belonging. The spotlight may have faded on Elvis Presley's Las Vegas performances long ago, but the Las Vegas Diaries allow us to hear at last what was happening when those stage lights went dark. The unscripted, unguarded voice of the man behind the legend, trying, like all of us, to make sense of his place in the world. As Elvis himself says in one of the final recordings, "When all is said and done, I hope people remember that I tried my best. That's all any of us can do, right? Just try our best with whatever gifts and burdens we're given. Some days I succeed, some days I fail, but I never stop trying to find the music, to connect, to be worthy of the love people gave me. Whether that's enough, well, I guess history will decide."